Hello and welcome to number 19, Reading Comprehension Exercise. And as is the norm, we request you to download the app so that you can get access to the free content for IPMAT. And also it's the most active group of aspirants in India, all right. And then you can engage yourself on the app again and win some iCoins you can redeem after you have won 500 bucks. And of course, those of you who are in class 11th or 12th or just passed out, you may have to take a decision and quickly about join the batches for 27 and 28 IPMAT. And here is the passage. Kindly read, pause and read. Question 1. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. Number 5. Number 6. All right. So, now that you have read the passage and solved it, we can start with reading the passage and trying to discuss the answers and the options. And at the end of the video, we'll also talk about what was the difficulty level of this passage and in how many minutes should you be able to solve it. मैंने solve किया है, मेरे को 1.5 घंटा लगा था. All right, but you have to take much less. Fine, we start reading it. Wars. Whether between or within states are not ending in the 21st century. War start हो रहा है but end नहीं हो रहा. Frozen conflicts, stalemates, and periodic pauses in fighting have become the norm. Why then does the United States struggle to influence wars fought by its security partners despite providing substantial military and diplomatic support? So why is it that US, the strongest country in the world, is not able to put an end to a war that it starts with its partners? Recent experience in Yemen, Ukraine, and Gaza suggests that financial and military assistance does not automatically translate into decisive influence. The United States often shares security interests with its partners and supplies equipment, training, intelligence needed to sustain their campaigns. Yet, its ability to shape how those wars are fought or when they end has proved limited. So even though US provides the intelligence and the equipment and the even in training, they have not been able to decide when the war will end. They are not able to influence that much. One reason is that, now the first reason, one reason is that the United States and its partners often fail to establish a clear shared end state at the beginning of a conflict. How do we stop something that we have started? They do not discuss this part at the beginning of the war, and hence maybe midway they just lose the track. Early discussions may remain vague about political objectives, the meaning of victory, or what should follow the fighting. This lack of clarity can complicate later diplomacy. The longer a conflict lasts, the more difficult it becomes to maintain agreement about strategy and desired outcomes. So if you do not establish the goals, set the goals clearly at the start of a task, it will become increasingly difficult for us to figure out where are we going. A second pattern concerns, now the second one. A second pattern concerns domestic political support. At the beginning of a partner's war, public backing may be strong. Over time, however, support can weaken as debates emerge over the morality and legality of the conflict or over the partner's conduct. As public concern grows, continued assistance becomes more politically difficult. So initially, maybe because of that euphoria or adrenaline or whatever, the public goes with the government to wage a war. But then later when the difficulties arise, I mean the supplies and everything, then maybe the public starts to question that are we doing the right thing or not. So one was a lack of clarity, and the second was concerns regarding domestic political support. Differences between the US and its partner also tend to emerge over time because the United States does not exercise command and control over a partner's military operations. does not exercise command over and control over a partner's military operations, its officials cannot simply determine how the war will be conducted. Their frustration with limited influence can create friction, especially when the partner remains committed to continuing the conflict, while US officials increasingly favor negotiated settlement. So now, if the US top brass cannot decide, they are not the decision makers that how the war should be fought, then obviously they are helpless and they cannot bring their partner to try and get a negotiated settlement. These patterns suggest that US leverage is greatest at the outset of a partner conflict. जब लड़ाई शुरू हो ना, तभी आप सबसे पावरफुल हो रहे हो अपने conditions lay down करने के लिए in terms of the US. American decision makers therefore need to use that leverage, that advantage, early to negotiate and clarify shared political objectives. Right? At the start of the war, the partner needs US more than at any other point of time. So that is the time when the US should negotiate heavily with the partner that, okay, this is how we are going to fight the war, and this is how we are going to end the war, and this is when we are going to end the war. And clarify shared political objectives, desired end states, and expectations for assistance. Assistance should be linked to a transparent understanding of the intended outcome. As US leverage declines, coherent oversight also becomes important. Partners can more easily dismiss American preferences when different US agencies send inconsistent messages. Maintaining disciplined communication can help preserve whatever influence remains. So if the communication is not very clear, the partner may not be very sure about following which agency. Finally, the US should not rely solely on pressure directed at its partner. They should not only rely in trying to make the partner understand. It should also consider diplomatic strategies aimed at the adversary. जिनसे लड़ाई हो रहा है उनसे भी diplomatic channel open करके चलें. Even when US forces have not directly entered a conflict, the adversary may regard the US as a participant because of its support for the partner. अब partner को आप support तो कर ही रहे हो, तो the adversary, the country you are at war with, she may also consider US as the enemy. Direct diplomacy with that adversary need not represent a betrayal of the partner. It can be necessary to create conditions for ending a war. The broader lesson is that supporting a partner does not guarantee control over its war. Influence depends heavily on early clarity, political support, shared interest, consistent US decision making, and diplomacy. If these factors are not addressed early, US leverage, that is the advantage, may decline as the conflict becomes harder to end. So, early clarity, political support, shared interest, consistent US decision making, and diplomacy. These are the factors that need to be taken care of early in the conflict, because later on the US starts to lose its advantage. Easy passage in terms of understanding the English used. Alright, the language used, that way passage आसान सा है. Let's see the questions and the options. Maybe they seem lengthy, that's it. Which of the following best explains the central policy dilemma identified in the passage? Alright, war khatam kab kare bhai, problem hoti hai. The United States possesses substantial military and diplomatic resources, but its partners increasingly prefer prolonged conflicts because they believe American involvement prevents the conflicts from being decisive. I don't think we have talked about that the partner believes that American involvement is indecisive. No discussion as such, beta. We have to eliminate this. B, the US has considerable leverage over wars fought by its partners, yet that leverage becomes harder to exercise because the two sides gradually develop different objectives, while domestic American support for continued involvement also weakens. So if you remember what all was there in the last para, all right, early clarity, political support, shared interest, everything. So that out of those, at least two things are covered in B. So we have already eliminated A. Let's hold B, go to C. The US has failed to influence partner wars primarily because it has increasingly withdrawn from military involvement, leaving its partners without sufficient intelligence, equipment, and diplomatic assistance to pursue American objectives. By the way, they are continuously giving intelligence, equipment, training, and everything. So we can eliminate based on this when it says without sufficient. The passage does not mention that intelligence and training provided by the US is insufficient. ऐसा बात नहीं हुआ बेटा. Eliminated. D. The US principal difficulty lies in persuading its domestic audience to support wars fought by foreign partners. But initially, the public may support, right? So it is not that they have to, the US government has to kind of persuade heavily. Since disagreements over operational strategy between the US and its partners are comparatively insignificant. All right, I don't think the first part, the US principal difficulty lies in persuading its domestic audience. But the domestic audience comes later. Initially, तो objectives ही नहीं आप set कर पा रहे हो ना, तभी end नहीं होता war. This is gone. We stick to B for Bombay. Next, which of the following, if true, would most seriously challenge the passage's recommendation that US leverage should be maximized at the beginning of a partnered war? हमारा author कहता है जब लड़ाई शुरू होती है ना तभी US को टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस ले डाउन कर देने चाहिए क्योंकि उस समय पार्टनर यूएस पे हेविली डिपेंडेंट रहता है. वी नीड टू वीकन दिस. सीरियसली चैलेंज द पैसेजेस रिकमेंडेशन दैट यूएस लेवरेज शुड बी मैक्सिमाइज्ड एट द बिगिनिंग. वी नीड टू चैलेंज की नहीं जरूरी नहीं है ऐसा. ओके. ए. In several future conflicts, US officials succeed in establishing broad political objectives with their partners before hostilities begin. Although disagreements later arise regarding the precise military strategy needed to achieve them. तो ये तो बात वहीं पे हो गया कि later भाई disagreements arise हो गए तो फायदा ही क्या हुआ फिर तो. Alright, so it doesn't weaken. B. Partners frequently interpret American diplomatic messages differently from the way US officials intended them, particularly when multiple US agencies communicate simultaneously. Again, this is not going to challenge the passage. If at all, maybe it's going with the passage. C. Domestic American support for a partner's war declines more rapidly when the US state has not clearly explained the political objectives of the conflicts to its own citizens. Beta, US ने क्या करना है? It has to leverage its influence early in the conflict. The question is not about domestic support. It is about when does the United States of America put pressure on its partner to clarify the objectives and the conditions. So I don't think domestic American support की बात हो रही है. D. Evidence from several partnered wars shows that partners become substantially more dependent on US military assistance as conflicts continue, thereby making the US more capable of forcing them to accept American conditions at later stages than at the beginning. Now this option says कि look boss, you are saying कि US should leverage influence right at the start, but ये option कह रहा है कि जैसे से war आगे बढ़ता है partner और ज़्यादा dependent हो जाते हैं. So when the partner is more dependent on the US, which means US has got now more power and now it is better to negotiate than to negotiate at the start of the conflict. All right. So if we choose this, it most seriously challenges the passage's recommendation that US should maximize at the beginning of a partnered war, the leverage that is US carries. Okay. But answer D. Slightly tricky question तो मतलब थोड़ा घुमा फिरा के बढ़िया ही था यार. But you see, beta, elimination works every single time. Number 3, the passage suggests that the emergence of disagreements between the US and its security partners is difficult to avoid primarily. Disagreements between the US and the security partners is difficult to avoid primarily because, okay, A. The US and its partners enter wars with fundamentally incompatible national interests, making genuine cooperation possible only during the initial stages of the conflict. Fundamentally incompatible. I think unclear is a better word. देखते हैं बेटा इसको. B. American officials generally possess superior strategic information. I don't think there's a comparison anywhere. So based on this word, it can be eliminated. पढ़ लेते हैं by the way. American officials generally possess superior strategic information, but lack of political authority required to impose their preferred operational decisions on an independent partner. But a superior strategic partnership इसकी बात नहीं हुई information की. C. The US provides extensive assistance without exercising direct command and control over the partner's conduct of the war, allowing differences in objectives and strategy to become increasingly consequential. Yes. the frustration of the US agencies when they do not have direct control over the strategies followed by the partner. But I mentioned hai wo. Let's hold it. Let's go to D. Partners tend to interpret American military assistance as evidence that the US has accepted responsibility. But I don't think passage mein kahin bhi ye hint hai that US has accepted the responsibility for the war. In fact, it is not even fighting. It is providing assistance. Thereby, expecting Washington to support their decisions even when American domestic opinion changes. It is not the acceptance of responsibility by the US. But this is gone. We can eliminate A on the basis that fundamentally incompatible national interests. And we go to C. The US provides extensive assistance without exercising direct command and control over the partners' conduct of the war, allowing differences in objectives and strategy to become increasingly consequential. All right. Number 4. Suppose that in a future partner conflict, the US and its partner agree at the outset on a clearly defined political end state, that how will we finish it off. However, the partner later refuses to consider negotiations because it believes continued fighting can produce a substantially better outcome. Based on the passage, which of the following is the most likely consequence? Initially, chalo humne establish kar liya ki this is how we are going to end. But as the war progresses, the partner says, no boss, I think we can continue fighting for better results. Iska matlab kya hoga? The initial agreement would largely eliminate the problem of war termination because clearly defined objectives prevent partners from developing substantially different preferences as circumstances change. But yahan pe you cannot change the premise. It says the partner later refuses to consider negotiations. All right. So you can't say कि जो यहाँ लिखा है वो गलत है, हम सही करते हैं. Incorrect. B. The US would retain strong influence over the partner because an agreed end state automatically creates sufficient leverage to determine the timing and terms of termination. No, how can you say that US will hold more leverage, or at least the sort that it held right at the start of the conflict? Partner तो भड़क गया ना, बोल रहा है हम नहीं सुनेंगे आपकी. तो you can't say that automatically creates. Absolute option हटाते हैं जी. C. The initial agreement would reduce one important source of friction. पहला है भाई हम ये लड़ाई यहाँ पे खत्म करेंगे, चलो एक फ्रिक्शन तो रिमूव होता है. But it would not eliminate the possibility that the partners' interests could diverge from those of the US as the war continued. D. The partners' refusal would demonstrate that the original agreement was strategically meaningless. Absolute कि meaningless बकवासी था, करना ही नहीं चाहिए. Since disagreements over the termination necessarily indicate that no genuine agreement could have existed at the beginning. But the situation and circumstances are changing. So you cannot say that the circumstances that were there initially and whatever was agreed based on those circumstances was meaningless. It had some meaning. It had a value. But yes, as the circumstances changed, the partner also said, we are not going to follow them. So it's not as if it was absolutely bogus. No. We go to C. The initial agreement would reduce one important source of friction, but it would not eliminate the possibility that the partners' interests could diverge from those of the US as the war continued. All right. Number 5. Which of the following can be most reasonably inferred from the passage regarding the effect of prolonged conflicts on the US policy making? Okay, inferred from the passage regarding the effect of prolonged conflicts on US policy making. Janta bhadkti hai boss prolonged war se. As wars continue, growing domestic scrutiny and emerging disagreements with partners can increase pressure on US decision makers to favor negotiated settlement over indefinite military support. And that is what the author suggests na ki bhai, you are not directly in the war, but the adversary may consider that you are also at war. So in that case, you should open a diplomatic channel, and that is not a betrayal to your partner. ये तो बोला है ना भाई, तो सीधी बात है. To favor negotiated settlement over indefinite military support. Hold करते हैं इसको. B. The primary reason US officials favor negotiated settlement is that prolonged wars substantially reduce the military capabilities of American partners. Reduce the military capabilities of American partners, but nowhere has it been discussed कि partner का military capability reduce होता है. वो तो कहता है partner अब सुन ही नहीं रहा US की. It's not that their military powers are reducing, even if they are passage में नहीं है, eliminated. C. Domestic opposition becomes politically significant only when the US completely loses the ability to influence a partner's military operation. No. It's not that the public is waiting for US to lose its ability to influence the outcome completely. War, if it is prolonged, they start talking about it. It's not, they don't wait कि जब सब खत्म हो जाएगा तब बात करेंगे. Not at all. D. Once disagreements emerge between the US and its partner, continued assistance becomes strategically impossible regardless of the broader US interest. कहीं भी पैसेज नहीं बोलता है कि it is impossible to support them. Alright, it is, अगर prolonged है तो पहला problem क्या है? That there is growing domestic scrutiny and support reduces and hence US should consider negotiated settlement. Alright, तो अपन बच्चा जाते हैं नंबर A पे. The last question. Which of the following most closely reflects the author's reasoning behind recommending direct diplomacy with the adversary? बोलता है ना कि भाई वो they may consider you at war and hence it is better to open a diplomatic channel. देखते हैं. Since US partners often become unwilling to compromise once they have invested heavily in a conflict, the US must independently negotiate with the adversaries to prevent partners from obstructing peace efforts. बेटा obstructing peace efforts तो कहीं भी नहीं क्लियर है कि पीस करना चाह रहा है तो उसको वो ऑब्स्ट्रक्ट कर रहे हैं. वो बोला लड़ाई नहीं रोकेंगे, बट यूएस चैनल खोल भी तो नहीं रहा है. चैनल ओपन करेगा, देन देखते हैं कि whether the partner obstructs or not. As of now, we are not sure the partner is trying to obstruct peace efforts. Okay. B. Because the adversary may regard the US as a participant in the conflict, regardless of whether American forces are directly fighting, diplomatic engagement with that adversary can be necessary for pursuing US interest and war termination. This is precisely what the author has stated कि भाई तुम लड़ो या ना लड़ो, अगले ने आपको दुश्मन मान लिया है तो बेटर है कि उससे हम negotiation करना start कर दें. C. Direct diplomacy becomes necessary mainly when US domestic support for a partner's war collapses. Since negotiations with the adversary allow the US to disengage without openly abandoning its partner. No, ये जो discussion था ना कि diplomatic channel खोलना चाहिए, it is not because घर पे problem है, it is because the adversary itself considers you an enemy. So it's better to talk to them. May regard the US as a participant in the conflict. Yes, it's not because of decreasing domestic support. हटा बेटा. D. The US should negotiate directly with adversaries because its security partners generally lack the diplomatic capacity. कहाँ पे लिखा है भाई कि जो इसके partners उनके पास diplomatic capacity नहीं है? Maybe they don't want to exercise it. वो use ही नहीं करना चाहता. ये थोड़ा कि है नहीं. To reach agreements capable of producing lasting settlements. हटाओ इसको and go back to B for Bombay. So please let us know your answers out of 6. And अब तो बढ़िया होगा. By the way, this passage was very easy to understand with few key ideas. All right. But the options were lengthy to eliminate. So I mean, if I remember correctly, but I started at 11:13, ended at 11:19. That means 6 minutes. Okay. You may take slightly more, maybe 8. Just because it was a lengthy read, that's it. Difficult तो नहीं था कहीं से, अगर आप theme समझ गए हो तो ठीक है. So be at it, keep fighting, you will win. See you soon.